Moving on to general items. Number 20. Final financial report for fiscal year ending June 30th, 2016, presented by our illustrious Robin Pertagna.
Good evening, Mayor and members of the City Council. Tonight, I am bringing you the final financial report for fiscal year 15-16. Our fiscal year ended June 30th, 2016. First, I will review the results of operations during the fiscal year with the general fund, and then I will get into the results of both the water and the wastewater funds. Please feel free to stop me anytime if you have questions about any of the slides or anything else that I'm presenting. This is the highest level overview summary of our general fund. It shows the fund balance on a budget versus actual basis in millions of dollars. It includes the beginning fund balance as of July 1st, 2015, total revenues budgeted and actual revenues received for the year, along with expenditures and the ending fund balance. The original 15-16 budgeted expenditures were $37.4 million. Throughout the fiscal year, we added a total of $2.5 million in additional appropriations. The items that were included in that were grant appropriations of just under $1.1 million, prior year purchase order encumbrances of about $353,000, MOU negotiations and salary changes $852,000, and strike team overtime of about $145,000. That brought the final budgeted expenditures to a total of $39.9 million. Actual expenditures ended the year at $37.3 million, under budget by $2.5 million. And I'll get into more details on that here in a little bit. Savings occurred across almost all departments and line items of the budget. I'll show you a breakdown of that savings too here in a couple minutes. We ended the fiscal year with an uncommitted fund balance, which meets the Council's fiscal priority policy of a 15% reserve of the 16-17 appropriations. So my next several slides will focus on the city's revenues, and after that I'll move on to the expenditures. Sales tax is our #1 revenue source for the city's general fund. This gives you 10 years worth of history for sales tax. Covers fiscal year 06-07 all the way up through fiscal year 15-16. You can see the trends over that 10-year period. I'll be showing you this for the top 8 revenue sources within the general fund tonight. It's interesting to see that gross sales tax revenues for fiscal year 06-07, and then they declined through the recessionary period and began recovering in fiscal year 10-11. Fiscal year 15-16 does include a one-time cleanup payment received from the state as it relates to the triple flip of just under $824,000. So the 15-16 total of $13.25 million is slightly inflated on a go-forward basis. This is the quarterly sales tax on a cash basis when we compare the most recent quarterly data with the same quarter of the previous fiscal year and show the increase or decrease over time. You can see that for the period of 16 quarters, we only had 2 quarters that were actually down. And for fiscal year 15-16, the average of the quarters was 3.925% increase, and we budgeted for 3.5% increase. So we were moderately above what we had budgeted by almost a 0.5 percentage point. There's always fluctuations in what we receive on a cash basis from the State Board of Equalization that gets direct deposited to our bank account on a monthly basis, and the actual audited data that comes from our sales tax audit, or HDL, that shows us where when the cash catches up with any abnormalities with their reporting, if somebody misses a payment or makes a double up payment, that's the adjusted basis that you see on here. I always like to see that as well, because that tells me ultimately where the cash is going to end up. This is our second highest general fund revenue, our property taxes. You can see that those peaked in 07-08. With a steady decline till fiscal year 12-13, at which time they slowly began to increase. with the largest increase occurring in fiscal year 14-15. As it currently stands in 15-16, we're still 750,000 below where we once were. So we're coming back, but it's definitely been a slow progression. This is very interesting information to me. I know it's small on the screen, but you can see the trend line. It's the annual sales history for single-family dwellings in Yuba City, going back to 2001 up through calendar year 2015 with the first quarter of 2016 data. It's just interesting to see the trend line, and our property tax follows this trend line as well, because as home prices go down, so do our property taxes. So I like to show you this every year as well. Our franchise fees over the past 10 years. This shows a smaller decline during the recession and steady increases since fiscal year 11-12. In 15-16, the year-over-year increase was largely attributable to Comcast. Recreation program revenues. This shows that they peaked in fiscal year 08-09, which happens to be the year that the GAP facility opened, then declined each year until fiscal year 15-16, and we saw an increase in those revenues in 15-16 as well. Building permit revenues. You can see a big decline over time, and then a nice higher level in the most recent past 3 fiscal years, including the current year.
Quick question on that building permits. That looks like it coincides with when the specials were going on for solar.
Solar permits definitely caused an increase in our revenues.
That's about the year they really started pushing the specials from the federal government and state and things. So
yeah, we've had a lot of incoming building permit revenues from solar projects.
okay.
Business license tax revenues showed a small dip, and then growth has occurred every year since fiscal year 10-11. Our hotel motel surcharge, again, you can see that the trend line here with increases in the most recent years, with it peaking in fiscal year 15-16. And our last of our top 8 revenues are CSAG revenues, showing that we had a decline in 06-07 through fiscal year 11-12, and then increases through fiscal year 15-16. And this slide represents the total general fund revenues for the past 10 years. I think it's very important for you to see the trend line here, and when things declined for a period of time, we saw an increase of just over $1 million in fiscal year 13-14, an increase of $2.2 million in fiscal year 14-15, and another increase in fiscal year 15-16 of $1.69 million. In 15-16, revenues of $39.05 million represents an all-time high for our city general fund. And next, I'll transition to discussing our general fund expenditures. Let me correct myself. This is actually citywide. This is not just the general fund salaries and benefits. I wanted to show you the trend line on a citywide basis for salaries and benefits and some of the benefit items. So this is citywide expenditures for salary and benefits, showing that we declined for a period of time when we had furloughs in place, and that those are now most definitely on the uptake, and they would be significantly higher if it were not for the vacant positions that we have citywide currently that we're in the process of filling. This is the same information on a citywide basis, but it's just salaries with no benefits. So you can see the salary component that's actually dollars in our employees' pockets. Total employee benefits, and I think this is interesting because it shows that over time, benefit costs have been on the rise. It shows a small reduction for fiscal year 15-16, but again, that's attributable to vacancies. The vacancy savings is significant. We track that on a quarterly basis. I looked at the April 2016 total, and vacancies were saving the city about $3.35 million. So it's very significant. I've also, since we've been monitoring it for a couple years now, seems to be a trend where vacancies peak in October, and January and April they actually decline. These are citywide retirement costs here. Again, it shows a downward trend in 15-16. It's somewhat, I don't want to say misleading, but it is because of the vacancy savings and being so many vacant positions in the city. Just to give you a feel for that, we had 21 vacancies in the general fund in April of 2016, which compared to total budgeted positions authorized, it was 9.2%. And the high point was in October of 2015, where we had 32 vacancies, or 14%. So very, very significant. As a total of the general fund monies expended, 94% of the amounts budgeted for salaries and benefits were actually expended at the end of the fiscal year. I looked back at the trend line to see how that compared to prior years, because we have had very, very significant savings because of our vacancies. And the historical percentages going backwards, with 14-15 being the most recent year to 15-16, it was at 93.8%, so pretty comparable. The year before that, 95.7. Before that, 97.8. And before that, 98.7. And it's important to know that, because when we only had 1.3% savings, we were spending almost everything we budgeted. It's not savings that we can count on or use for other purposes. We really need to hang on to it for one-time expenditures, because once we fill the positions, we won't have that savings on an ongoing basis. Additionally, the savings from vacant positions in the current year is about 1.8 million. Looking back, it was previously 1.2 million. And with those higher percentages in the earlier years, 4 and 5 years ago, the savings was only about $600,000. So it is significant, but it's one time in nature, and I don't expect it to continue on into the future as we're actively doing recruitments. These are general fund expenditures in total, showing the trend there as well, and that we have now exceeded prior year total expenditures as well, with a total general fund expenditures of $37.3 million ending the fiscal year. As I mentioned before, the savings on a department by department basis, contributing to the total at the bottom of just under 2.6 million, comes from almost all departments. The city attorney budget shows it's as being over budget. That's not actually the city attorney. It's all the personnel, attorneys, and the things that we use to pay for negotiations and personnel action items. So as a point of clarification, and the fire department, that's for overtime for backfilling for their constant staffing model. Anytime anybody's out for any reason, the shift has to be covered, so they always have overtime costs that eat into their budget and cause them to go over budget typically. On a line item by line item basis, it shows you kind of where we ended the year. Overall, salaries and benefits saving 1.8 million, heat and power over budget, so on and so forth. Departments are responsible for managing their budgets and not going over budget for their department in its entirety. We look at the bottom line. If a department's over on a particular line item, it's expected that they'll have savings on some other line item to make up for it. Oftentimes there's shifts throughout the fiscal year where some costs go over where there's savings in other places.
I'd like to ask a little bit on the heat and power. I did notice that when I reviewed it. Did we identify specifically where the items that caused the heat or power to be over?
I did not look at that. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. I'd be interested in seeing that, because we might have a need to do some changes, some upgrades, or some things to save.
I'd be happy to take a look at that.
Okay, thank you.
And this is the rest of the items to get to a total of our savings at the end of the fiscal year. This is very, very busy, but it shows you the total revenues and the total expenditures for each of the fiscal years, with the revenues being in blue and the expenditures being in yellow. So when you look at the line items side by side, you can see the years that we had a surplus and then the years where we were deficit spending during the recession, and now where we're back to a surplus due to our vacancies. The surplus was $645,000 in 13-14. That increased to $1.81 million in 14-15, and in the current year it was $1.75 million. With that, I'll move on to discuss our water and wastewater funds. This is a summary of the water fund's budget versus actual. Operating revenues came in almost 10% less than budgeted, or slightly over $1 million, $1,017,600. The decline was almost entirely related to the drought water sales coming in $982,300 less than budgeted due to declines in customer usage, which is what we were encouraging customers to do. We wanted everybody to cut back their water consumption, and they did. But that definitely hurt our revenues. Penalty revenues were also $59,700 less than budgeted. We attribute that to the notification system that we use, where we do robo-dial phone calls to remind people that they need to get their payments into us prior to 8:30 a.m. on the shutoff day. That has really cut down on the number of shutoffs that we send folks out to do. And we would rather have people pay on time and not be shut off. Grant revenues were significantly less than budgeted, as the Prop 84 project reimbursements were received slower than anticipated, and all the other revenues were in line with budget expectations. On the expenditure side, expenditures for the operating fund were $1,156,000 less, or about 13% under budget. Looking at the line items that were not fully expended, they included savings of about $321,000 in salaries and benefits, $368,000 in heat and power, $137,000 in professional services, $93,000 in special equipment O&M, and $218,000 in chemicals. One of my favorite slides is our water debt coverage ratio. It's where we compare the revenues and the expenditures and look at how much we're able to cover the debt payments that we owe on our bonds. Our rating agencies have us look at this very carefully. You take total revenues, including the capital connection fees, subtract operating expenses to get net revenues, and then compare that to the total debt service requirement to be paid for that fiscal year. Per our bond covenants, this ratio must be maintained at 1.2 or 120%. The city's ratio dropped by 1.29 for fiscal year 14-15, still meeting our required ratio, but not by a whole lot. In fiscal year 15-16, the ratio increased back up to 1.44, but it included one-time capital connection fee revenues for the Prop 84 waterline project that we received of $1,625,000. I'll show you on the next slide what our ratio would have been without them. The fiscal year 16-17 adopted budget shows that we budgeted to continue meeting the required 1.2 ratio, and our ratio based upon our budgeted 16-17 revenues and expenditures it's equal to 1.45. So we're definitely meeting our bond covenants. This is the adjusted 15-16 water debt coverage. You can see that when I take out the $1.625 million in water connection fees, it drops our ratio down to 0.92%. Most definitely not in accordance with our bond requirements. So this further shows that we needed to increase water rates. We took the action necessary that we had to in order to meet the bond covenant requirements that we have to. And it just further shows why our rate increases were so necessary. Moving on to the wastewater utility. Revenues ended the year at about 101% of the amount budgeted, or $162,000 higher than anticipated. This was almost entirely attributable to an increase in the sewer service charges billed to customers in excess of the amount budgeted. Capital connection fees were also 1% higher than the amount budgeted, or about $7,500. Operating expenditures were at 84% of the amounts budgeted. The savings equated to about $1.6 million, and the savings occurred in salaries and benefits, about $547,000, heat and power, $99,000, professional services, $223,000, special equipment O&M, $237,000, and chemicals, $307,000. On the wastewater debt coverage ratio, we more than meet our minimum requirement of 1.2 on all years, and including the budgeted 16-17. We have much stronger coverage ratios. The calculation is exactly the same as it is on the water fund. And with that, I'll answer any questions you have.
Any questions from council members? Comments?
They're awesome and
A lot of
stimulating.
numbers.
I have to hand it to you, Robin. When you put this together, you put it together in a logical manner that we can see the historical data, see where we've been and where we're moving. And I think that that the policy decisions of this board and along with staff work have worked in concert to be able to achieve the goals that are really required by the citizens of this community, and that's to keep a viable delivery system, not just in water and wastewater, but also all of our infrastructure and everything else with the city, Yuba City, public safety, and all the other components. But I take my hat off to the staff on this.
Thank you.
Any other comments? With that, thank you for the presentation. It was awesome. We can understand it. That's great. I love it when I can understand things that easily. Okay.
Buy some bonds now.